Hello and welcome to my Let's Talk. This is the Gamer 2.0, and today we're going to be talking about if we're going to be experiencing possibly another gaming crash like the one we had in 1983. So I wanted to go ahead and pull up this small bit of information here. And so if we take a scroll down here, we can actually kind of see the size of the market back in 1983 was about $3.2 billion, and the size in 2014 was larger at $21.3 billion. And in 2024, it's actually even larger than that. But when we notice that the 1983 was the year that we had the crash, if we scroll down a little bit more, we actually see that in 1985, only 2 years after that, it had dropped to less than 10% of what it was in 1983 at only $100 million in 1985. So if we wanted to determine why this crash happened in 1983, what we do is we can just kind of look over here and we have a couple of reasons why. So we had the quantity over quality issue where we had video game companies believing that they could actually sell more units of their game system by having people buy the games to play it on that system. So we have a note here where it basically says that 12 million cartridges of Pac-Man were basically released when only 10 million people at the time actually owned the Atari 2600. So ultimately it only sold 7 million copies, and that left Atari with basically 5 million copies in stock that they couldn't move, because the game actually reviewed pretty poorly at the time. Then we also had the things like the unchecked competition, where at the time, it notes here that programmers were able to easily reverse engineer and create unlicensed games. So you had a bunch of people that were creating games and creating cartridges that wasn't really checked by whoever was actually making the console. So there was no real quality assurance at that point. This one also mentions the economic inflation, which I believe that would actually be more affecting arcades than it was actually the home consoles. And the reason being is that I believe it was because the Susan B. Anthony coin was being released back in around 1979, 1980, and people were complaining that basically the coin looked too much like a quarter compared to most of the other coins. And then we also had the competing industries where at the time, as it kind of mentions here, the personal computers and the video game consoles were almost exactly the same price, but PCs could typically process and play games a lot better than the consoles could. So because of all these different things, we actually had the crash where you saw a lot of companies that were either going bankrupt or that were having issues. So if we actually take a look back here, we can actually see just a list of a large number of the different consoles that were available at that time, such as from Atari, from the Arcadia, the Telegames consoles, and television, just all these different consoles that were all coming out that were all trying to compete for the same market space. So when we're taking a look at this kind of begs the question as to what companies were kind of the most affected. And I went ahead and I asked Google, and take it with a grain of salt, as we all know how good the AI for Google is. But what we basically see here is we see that Atari was kind of hit almost the hardest, just because they almost went bankrupt. They had a lot of issues. They ended up having to sell to another company. And then we also had the personal computers. So this is things like the Coleco and Timex, Sinclair, and other smaller companies that were dealing mostly with personal computers, as well as video game arcades, as we know that if you could play a game at home with the same, either or close to the same fidelity, graphics, or the ability to play almost the exact same games, what was the point of going out to an arcade where you had to pay money constantly to play the games versus buying the game and playing it at home? So the question is, are we going to see a similar crash to what we had in 1983 in the more current day? So if we take a look back here, we can actually take a look. So do we have an issue of quantity over quality? Well, no, we don't really have a bunch of units that are actually being produced that aren't moving because now it's mostly digital releases. But we do have a lot of companies that are assuming that they're going to sell a lot more than they actually do, which ends up kind of hurting them in the long run. Do we have unchecked competition? Well, this we actually do as well, because we have a lot of indie companies and a lot of AA developers that look to also produce games for not just the similar consoles, typically that's a little bit more hard to really break into, but actually doing it just for the PC, and a lot of games are being released specifically for the PC and available for that specific medium. Economic inflation, we definitely do have that right now with basically the cost of living going up higher and the cost of necessities going up higher makes it so that it's a lot more difficult to really spend money on things that are going to be more for entertainment, such as video games, movies, music, all those different kinds of things. Competing industries, with that one we really don't, because the competing market is basically through PCs and consoles, and people just basically buy one or the other, or they'll buy both. And then the console market only has 3 primary consoles in it. There are other consoles, but the 3 primary ones, which are from Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation, are the only 3 ones that we really kind of see making a lot of headway with the video game market. So this then begs another question: well, why do so many people think that there's a possibility of a crash in the near future? I would say that it would be most likely because of this. Video games are being made for a quote-unquote modern audience, but as we all know, there really isn't a modern audience. And if we actually kind of take a look down here at the bottom of this article, it says it turns out there is no modern audience. It doesn't exist. There's just, the audience has always been there, and so video games are being made for basically a group of people that don't really exist. It's a market that isn't really there, but it's a market that believes in certain ideology, things of that nature. So if we also take a look over here at the DEI Detected, we can actually kind of look and see a bunch of games that are kind of made for this modern audience that either didn't perform as well as it should have, had issues in its development, either didn't make the sales that it needed, or just attacked the players of the game, or just wanted to assume that because they don't agree with a specific ideology or a belief, that that group just happens to be pretty much evil. And this kind of leads to the question, well, if we're not going to have specifically a crash like we did in 1983, what really is going to happen? So in 2003 and 2024, we actually had a lot of layoffs in the gaming market and in the gaming industry, and we're going to probably see a continuation of this moving forward. Again, just the Embracer Group alone laying off over 4,500 people, Unity laying off 2,900, and we're probably going to see this continue to grow. And we're also probably going to see more major closings from either developers, game studios, things of that nature, and we're just going to see more of this kind of rolling out until at some point the investors into these games will kind of realize that this might not be the profitable proposition that they thought it was, and will try to either go back to how it was before, or they might just try to drop it altogether. And what this would do is this would probably see a lot of AAA games start to fail. And then what we would see is hopefully the people that either get laid off or leave these companies would go and either form indie game studios or AA game studios and start making their own projects rather than being reliant on large corporations that either take money from people that want to push specific ideologies, beliefs, or things of that nature, and kind of follow up on their own vision and their own prospects. And I think that would be a little bit more beneficial. So we would see kind of the loss of AAA gaming, but we would see an increase in indie and AA gaming. And that's just kind of where I think we're kind of sitting at for the current market space that we're kind of sitting in right now.